Like the fanboys who fanboy all over the fanboying. Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? September's must-haves, right? We talked about the crowdfunding in the past, right? The look-backs. But where are they now? Are they still worthwhile talking about? We're going to do 3 years worth of games here. 2021, 2022, and 2023. Where are they 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years down the line? Are they still worth talking about? Did they make any waves? Or was it all just hype? Let's go. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine. Let's go back to 2021 and start there. The biggest name from 2021, truth be told, was Voidfall. Is Voidfall still that good? Yes, I would make the argument that Voidfall has been very, very well received by all of the, well, people that it was marketed for in the first place, right? The heavy gamers, Euro optimized with a space combination. Huge amount of iconography, huge learning curve, but people are loving it for what it is, as long as you're really looking for it from that side of things. And now with Revenant hot on the heels, we're going to see, because I've seen this with the Eagle Griffin games and the Lacerdas, right? The heavies, but the lighter ones that are of the same ilk, of the same design, of the same aspects, have not done nearly as well. I'm looking at you, Bot Factory, compared to like Kanban, right? And so is it that it's just super heavy love? Or is it going to be more of the Voidfall universe love as well? I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see. And of pretty much all of the games across all 3 of these years, this is the best ranked game of all of them. Does that surprise you? Well, no. Board Game Geek skews heavy in the first place, but I think people thought it was going to be good, but this good? Okay. Food for thought. Next up, actually, the next best ranked one, I believe, from 2021, Beast. Beast, highly divisive. You either love it or you hate it. It's a one versus all. We'll talk about more of those, actually. This was apparently the month in 2021 for all of these to be going on. And the tricky part with this one was, well, it was sort of, I guess, looked at as a hidden movement, but it was really not much hidden movement and more just one versus all asymmetry in that, where Beast has a whole bunch of powers, Hunters have a whole bunch of powers, they're different, there's going to be movement alongside of things, but it's really going to be a smash grab, well, outmaneuver, rather than just a purely hidden aspect of things. And that left people a little bit sour grapes, or they just don't like one versus all. One versus all is up there with like pick up and deliver, I feel like, where you either love the mechanic or you hate the mechanic. It's a very small portion of our hobby as a whole. So I think it's freaking doing good. And surprisingly enough, well, 2 years later, when we get to 2023, we'll talk about where the expansion stands as well. Then CMON, Masters of the Universe, right? 1980s plastic meets, well, 1980s nostalgia plastic. And so I, again, as a one versus all lover, didn't really have any interest in this, but I was interested to see where it was going to go because, it was sort of designed, rumored, based on the previously well and very underrated Rise of Moloch from CMON. And it's kind of done okay. It was one of those weird IP splits where it was over in North America, and then Archon had the one that was over in Europe, and then people were trying to cross import and do that, and then CMON, had the second campaign for everyone else too. And so is it really that good? I mean, I don't hear anybody talking about this one. At least, Beast, right? At least with that, you hear people talking about how much they hate it. I just don't hear anything from this one. This was not CMON's winner in September from years past. So I would make the argument that this one is going to just fall through the cracks, and I don't think you're going to see anything of it in the years to come. And I would be surprised, even though it raised a bunch of money the second time around too, if CMON goes back to it. I think there's still a bunch of IP you could pull in, but mechanically speaking, thematically incorporated, I mean, I kind of wish they would have gone a different design direction myself personally, and I am one of those one versus all fans, but this one didn't do it for me. Again, we'll see if I'm wrong, because another one on this list we'll get to in a second. Tales from the Red Dragon Inn, probably one of the most underrated cooperative games recently delivered in 2023. Had a couple people's top 10 lists of 2023. I just played it in 2024. Yeah, it's doing stuff. I think this is going to rise up. The problem is, if you've got one of these games, you've got 6 of them, and how do you divide your time with a scenario-based crawl type situation? This is much more easily accessible. The aesthetic isn't as pleasing. Truth be told, the Tales from the Red Dragon Inn style of things, it's just not people's generalized art as a broad appeal. I say that again as not someone who dislikes it, but someone who goes, yeah, that's not going to attract me. But but it's also not going to, well, not attract me in the first place as well. I'm all about gameplay, and the gameplay delivers, right? And it's going to be a lower overhead. It's not going to be as nuanced and complex as you may like, but that also makes it a lot easier to the table. There's too many scenarios, though. I kind of wish it was split in half. It's, you know, for about $100, I kind of wish there was a $50 aperitif appetizer that you could get in on to know how much you like it. So from a crowdfunding aspect, it was overachieving, and I think they wholeheartedly delivered, and that's why they did a second campaign in the first place. And so I would be surprised if this isn't looked back on in a couple years as one of the best co-ops to come out in these past couple, well, years as well. So then the last up, again, another one versus all, City of the Great Machine, where you're either going up as an AI or you're going up as a citizens trying to revolt against the AI system with a modular, mobile sort of setup in terms of the grid-based situations that you're doing. Again, haven't heard much about it. I think one or two of the bigger channels really acclaimed it, but it's sort of flown under the radar as one of those where, you know, if it comes back around, I think it's going to raise a surprising amount of money. But truth be told, I'm not really sure what to make of it at this point. And comparatively to all the other one versus alls, yeah, it's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more nuanced, which ultimately makes it more difficult, because the tricky thing about this is you want that, but you also can't have too much of it, because again, these become lifestyle games. And if you're like me and you own the games, or you're always the one teaching, you always have to be the one. And that sometimes can get a little old, which is why I don't really recommend having more than like one or two of those games in your collection, your best ones. And is this the best one or the best one for you? So that's 2021, right? 2022, though, by far and away the best received game, crowdfunding wise, was not anywhere close to the nearest funded. Surprisingly, 2022 was, again, relatively big hits, and two of these are dramatically rising up the ranks already, one of which I think is actually going to surpass. Number two is going to surpass number one, but I'm talking about number one first because, well, it's got a type, or people have a type of this, and that's Legacy of You from Garphill Games, and which is going to be really interesting because I make the argument that I'm surprised Garphill hasn't gone back to this at this point, hasn't made an expansion, hasn't made a standalone. Now, not to say that they won't, and I'm sure that they've got years worth of games lined up in that sense. And as we're seeing at the time of me filming this, the concurrent Anarchy, subsequent, you know, sort of spiritual successor to Hadrian's Wall coming around, I think you're going to see something like that from Legacy of You in the very near future, asterisk, whatever that is. But I mean, top 600 rated game right now for a game that's been out, you know, just over a year, which again is freaking impressive. Anything that makes the top 1,000 within like a year or two is really climbing the ranks relatively quickly. Solo, building canals, repelling barbarians, and playing as a one player. Now, it's not as heavy as many people like, and it's a little bit more random. It's very hard and cutthroat, though, as a whole. So it's not going to be as, you know, difficult to get into as some of the other solo games that you may be used to. But I make the argument that, you know, the one player count is, again, a little bit of a nicher game. And again, a lot of those other solo, highly rated games have multiple player aspects. So it's probably got a little bit more of a ceiling. But I think that you're going to see this one recommended sort of in the shadows, especially from the one player only solo crowd, for years to come as well. Secondarily, you know, I'm eating crow in this one every time this one comes up, and that's CMON's Dune War for Arrakis, right? I said during the campaign that I wasn't sure they could do a good job balancing this with all of the extras and the exclusives that they normally put out. And you know what? I'm wrong. People love this game. I would love to play this game. It's going to be slightly easier, slightly more approachable, and less overhead in both aspects of setup, teardown, and learning than a War of the Ring, right? And so I would love this. I would love this. I can't just pull the trigger because, again, you know, 2 to 3 hours even is still going to be too much with a lower learning curve to teach right now to my gaming partner, my wife, and the kids aren't old enough. Right? Can't indoctrinate them. And I'm not going to have more of those games that are just going to sit on the shelf waiting for the opportunity cost, where the binary number of plays is what I'm going to be looking at for the next half dozen years. But I'd make the argument that this is probably, as the 28th ranked war game and just out of the top 800 in the board game rankings already, probably going to overachieve more than almost anything else of any of these years, maybe apart from Voidfall and maybe one other game we'll talk about for 2023, depending on what happens with it the second time around and how widely it gets. Because again, that's the other big thing with a lot of these rankings, is that if you just don't have the numbers in Board Game Geek, it doesn't matter how well rated you are, you're just never going to get higher. And that's, you know, a little bit of the sad case, also, well, good case too, depending on how many people are liking it or not liking it. Review bombs! Anyway, so again, Dune War for Arrakis, they say you don't need the exclusives unless you're going to play it a dozen times in, you know, 3 months. And so you can easily do without that. And it's a meta game as well. And so that's going to be the appeal. And it's appealing for people like me who can't get into the other one in the first place. So again, I think this one is going to be highly recommended years to come from that aspect. Then we're going Sagrada Artisans, actually. Again, I'm not eating crow on this one. I don't need colored pencils with a crowdfunding campaign no matter what. But it has failed to make a whole lot of traction, I think. And I'm not sure really if it's the legacy game aspect of things that's just sort of fizzling out, or the fact that crowdfunding is not made for legacy in the first place and you have to over-deluxify and under-promise what you're actually delivering. And I think that's more of the criticism that I can wager at it more than anything else. Or are people just saturated with Sagrada? Sort of like they got a little, or I got a little saturated with Role Player. Not in a bad way, not saying it's a bad game, but you just reach a point where you go, how many iterations of this do I need? Like Clank. And so eventually one of them becomes that aspect of things. And I'd say that there wasn't a whole lot of necessarily super good reason to pick this up on crowdfunding. So I think it's going to be well recommended over years to come, but I just don't think it's going to necessarily stand out or stand up as much of the other sort of set collection-esque choose your own with some more asymmetry. I wish you could have marketed it more and not gone crowdfunding, and I think you would have been a little bit better from a transparency aspect of what this is actually offering, because that's the blessing curse of legacy games, is they go off of word of mouth based on people who play them and love them. And I just haven't seen this one comparatively. Not that it's not, but if I don't hear anything, again, I don't know. Take that for what you will. Then Tainted Grail, second time around with this one too, Kings of Ruin from Awakened Realms. And it supposedly irons out all of the issues with Tainted Grail in the first place, but again, I don't really know. This one's going to be sort of a wait and see. I could see this one doing just as well as Tainted Grail in the first place, but I feel like some of these games, this one in particular, gets a little bit fanboyish, right? Like the fanboys who fanboy all over the fanboying. Saying that tongue-in-cheek, folks. But supposedly this one's better than the first one. And the first one had its issues, but I'm not really sure, again, by sheer volume, sometimes the Board Game Geek rankings go the other way, where volume can outweigh sometimes the, wavering of it up and down. Is it going to ultimately have as much traction as the first one? I have no idea. Got rid of some of the grindiness, got rid of some of the repetitiveness, got some of the narrative, bumps that it had, and it's still a lifestyle game, though. So I'd make the argument that you probably already have 3 of these games in your collection. And I'd say unless you're the target type, this is another one that's going to sit on the wall and not really get played and collect dust more than anything else. But if Awakened Realms really did put out a better second edition, essentially, well, that's freaking awesome on them. The only problem I have with that is that it just kind of goes to show, especially, with a couple of their track records, maybe this, maybe Nemesis, maybe 1 or 2 of the others, where you're going, okay, well, should I just wait for the second time around? Aetherfield's the second wave. ISS Vanguard second wave, with some iterations, with some, just revamping. Does it make you rethink some of your other pledges from them and just saying, okay, I'm going to wait until you do it a second time and get some of that stuff smoothed out, so I don't feel like I'm sort of the guinea pig or going to get a better product at a later date for, plus or minus the cost at this point? Because wouldn't you rather have just a slightly increased cost than having to buy an upgrade kit? That's my own personal feelings. Then the last one from this year, we're actually going with Terraforming Mars, the dice game, which, you know what? This is going to get poo-poo. This is going to get panned. I know people don't like it. I like it. I think all 3 of them actually give you a vastly different dynamic and approach. And I can see this one rising up the ranks, but this is also going to be a lot of people's dark horse, because I think it's good, but I don't think you're going to see anything else from it. And I think it's got enough to go on, though. And being the fact that all 3 of these are different enough, you can have all 3 of them in your collection. I've never played Terraforming Mars, but I absolutely love Ares Expedition as well as the dice game. Dice game is going to be most approachable and easiest to get into and the quickest and the snappiest turns. Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition is going to give you a little bit more of that dynamic race for the galaxy style things. And the original is going to give you more of your Euro optimization. So which are you a fan of? Because they all use similar ideas, but they do it in a completely different way, which is why I still have Dice and Ares Expedition in my collection, although the expansions for Ares Expedition are a whole nother issue. So I can see this one slowly creeping up eventually into the top 1,000, but I think it's going to take time because, again, I don't think volume and hype were necessarily there because, again, it was good, but not absolutely outstanding. So it's going to fall a little bit between the cracks as well. Then let's go to 2023. 2023, we're not even, necessarily delivered on most of these, but the most promise for 2023, the highest ranking one, I would make the argument in the near future, or potentially to supplant or surpass a lot of these others, except for maybe Voidfall and Dune that I mentioned, is Isofarian Guard. Because again, if you got a type, this is the type of game that people rate and people look at very heavily on Board Game Geek, and they like it from a 1 to 2 player dynamic. And I like the fact that they stayed with really the 1 to 2 player dynamic. I don't need everything to be 3 and 4. And again, that's probably going to exclude me from getting it in some of those cases. But I also look at things like God of War, where they marketed that as a 1 to 2 player game, and then they immediately put out a 3 to 4 player expansion. I also like the fact that you don't bundle extra, expansion 3 to 4 player content as part of a pledge. I like that. And from a solo narrative, I don't really know dynamically what it's doing that much different that people are in love with so much, because again, I have too many of those, not enough time to play them, and so I'm going to leave that for other people. But from the overall general consensus is it's been one of the more well-received ones in the last 1 to 2 years. So don't be surprised if you see that one, eclipsing things more. Oh, he tied it in right there. He went there. Dragon Eclipse from Awakened Realms. I have no clue what to make of this, right? Still at the time of me filming this, things aren't finalized. The modes aren't finalized. They haven't done all of the rule books and the extensive sort of explanation of what you're going to be looking at. And so again, it sort of screams to me with Awakened Realms, like, you may get all of that stuff very well ironed out. You may get it way late. Way late is always better than not getting it whatsoever, but it also may end up not being something that you initially wanted in the first place in that exact way, shape, and form. And therein lies the problem of pledging during the campaign. When they're not putting rule books out, it brings this big question mark to the table as a whole of saying, okay, is this worth the risk? Or again, why not just late pledge? Because we really haven't seen a price jump increase in most significant campaigns, and most people are using pledge managers. So there's risk and there's, risk. If you don't want the risk, there's no incentive to back during the campaign when you can get the exact same thing afterwards with much less of the risk and a rule book at the time, of doing that. And you can always upgrade from a $1 if you're really, really, really concerned. It's bringing the gotta catch 'em all Pokemon vibe to the tabletop scene. I think they could be doing something really special here from a cooperative, or even more so a PvP style of things. But the cooperative also screams to me a little bit scary, more like Frostpunk, where yes, it's multiplayer, but it's multiplayer we hold hands and we make joint decisions, rather than it's multiplayer something like the Loop or Tales to Amaze, where you have your own unique individual aspects of things that there isn't a whole lot of quarterbacking, or you feel like it's dynamically different with the aspects that each person has individually. So that'd be my big concern from that game as a whole. Then Flock Together, which just recently got delivered. I got sitting on my shelf right here. I think this is going to surprise a lot of people. This and Defenders of the Wild, again, from 2023's crowdfunding talk. I talked about them and I said, these are the games to watch. These are good crowdfunding games. These are good cooperative games. And they're coming out with an expansion, I think, between now and maybe the end of the year as well, 2024, to give us a little something more. And I think it needs a little something more, but I think it's going to be solid. The question is whether or not it's going to be just a perfect fit for you because of the cemented dynamic differences and going to the different locations and having some of the asymmetric chicken powers as you're flipping through your books. That one has the ability to sort of sneak in under there as one of your dark horses of 2024 or from 2023. Final Girl is still going to be the best, most well-received one probably of the, last couple of years solo-wise. Season 3 was from 2023. And it's just going to be another Marvel United situation. Like, how much of this do you need? At what point do you reach saturation? And is there enough variability, or is there enough creep in that way that you're going to keep them all or want to keep them all? And because you're doing all of that variability, inevitably finding ones that you may or may not want. So that one's going to stand the test of time, and it already has stood the test of time. It's just going to be, again, how many times do they go back to it to give you more content? I mean, just like we're seeing with DC United from CMON as well this year. Then Beasts Shattered expansion, no idea, right? It's going to give you more of the awesomeness. It's going to give you a little bit more power, a little bit more asymmetry, but it's not going to change the dynamics of that game in the first place. So if you were not a fan of it, the base is going to be just the same as the expansion, and so you're not going to like the expansion, but it's probably going to elevate it a little bit. Is it going to be essential? Ooh, it's too early to tell from that aspect of things. So we'll see with that one. Tricktakers is going to be probably on my top 10 of the year from Portland Gaming Collective, the Japanese Tricktaker that they brought over as an asymmetric sort of trick-taking style route, if you will, with asymmetric win conditions for each individual character, up to like 8 that are included in the base game. Expansion maybe sometime in 2025. Again, it's going to be trick-taking. Trick-taking is going to be very, very niche, and, unless you love trick-taking, this one's not going to appeal to you, but it's one of the best trick-taking games I've played in the last couple of years, so I'm going to give it kudos from that aspect. And then last up, we're going to talk about Hoplomachus with Pandora's Box, with the several different expansions that are going to give you mix, match, and compatibility with Hoplomachus. Is this going to be an essential edition? Which one of these is right for you? Do you get the all-in on the situation like this? Well, the problem is, if you get an all-in like this, well, it's going to give you more, but you're inevitably going to find an expansion that doesn't fit, or you're just not going to use it as much. So that's the risk with expansion-driven campaign in the first place. Hoplomachus is a known product, though. So if you liked Hoplomachus, this is going to give you more, and if you really liked it, you kind of knew what you were getting into in the first place and which one you should have gotten. But with the FOMO aspect of crowdfunding as a whole, we're seeing a lot more of the, well, you got to get them all, got to catch them all, as we were just talking about with Dragon Eclipse. And I don't think this one strays far from it. But the question now, I guess, is Chip Theory Games going to go back to it, or go back to it in any way, shape, or form in the future? We saw it once with 20 Strong. I could see them going back to it in some other way or something adjacent. So I'd be surprised if we don't see it again. I think this one's going to be very well received, but I think, again, just like with the Beast Shadow expansions, it's not changing things dramatically enough. So if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. So there you go. A little bit from the last 3 years, where they're at now, my thoughts on them, and why you maybe should, or, well, maybe shouldn't even look at them still at this point. So there you go. September's best and where they're at. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day. Or maybe ISS Nemesis.